Hi, I'm Gary, and this is episode 263 of EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. And on the show today, we'll be looking at canopies. This season of the podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. Before we start, a quick reminder that my ebook, So You've Gone Electric, is in its third version. If you purchased an early version, make sure Amazon sends you through the updated version automatically. If you don't have it, the link's in the show notes to buy it. And you'll know it's the new version because it has a shiny red EV on the cover. Now, our main topic of discussion today is canopies. So let me set the scene. It's late in the evening in spring with typical British weather, which means it's blowing a gale and the rain's coming down in stair rods. Look that one up, Gen Z. You pull into the brand new Instavolt charging hub at 3 Maids Hill in Winchester, ready to charge your EV. There's plenty of available chargers, there's a lovely looking Starbucks beckoning to you. There's even a doggy rehydration station for Butch, the black lab that insists on coming with you wherever you go. But first, you need to get the car charging. You plug in, swipe the card, and the system errors. With Instavolt, you're supposed to authorize the payment first, then plug in. So you got to replace the cable on the charge unit, but it's locked in, so you need to retrieve the keys from your pocket and unlock the car, and then you need to start again. Authorize with your payment card, wait for the system to process the payment, wait for the charger to acknowledge the payment, plug in, wait for the charger to make the handshake, and then eventually the charge will start. Now, this might have taken a couple of minutes. In the middle of the morning on a calm spring day, this isn't too much of an issue. But this is Britain. It's quite dark for long chunks of the winter, the wind is blowing, and as we've already said, the rain is pouring. Now, those 2 minutes now mean that you're cold, windswept, and soaked through to the skin. But why? Because this brand new super hub with 44 chargers, drive-through bays, excellent access, on-site facilities, and everything you would need from a charging site is missing one thing: a canopy. Now, why is that? I mean, every single petrol station you go to has a canopy, right? But with only a number of exceptions, most charging sites don't have canopies. And today I want to talk about why that is and what the CPOs say about it. But first, let's set some parameters. There are over 75,000 charging sites across the UK at the moment. A huge number of these are AC only, and a lot of them are single sites, such as lamppost chargers or a couple of connectors attached to a car park bay somewhere. Likewise, there are a large number of DC sites that have 1 or 2 chargers located in the car park of somewhere like Starbucks or McDonald's, and I'm not talking about them, although we would like canopies there. But I am talking about the hubs, of which there are now 673 in the UK. Large sites, custom built by CPOs to entice EV drivers to their location. And this is where the issue starts, because there is no consistency amongst CPOs regarding the provision of hubs. Take BP Pulse, for example. They have a great DC ultra-rapid charging hub at the NEC. It has great canopies over the top, as does their newly converted Cromwell Road site in West London. But the next largest BP hub by number of units is actually in Stafford, and it has 0 canopies. Nor do any of the other hubs in the West Midlands, and I know because BP invited me up there to film them last year. In fact, the BP Hammersmith hub, which was one of the first hubs in central London and is located less than 2 miles from the Cromwell Road site, has 5 units, all sitting in the open air, despite the petrol pumps located 20 yards away on the same site being covered with a canopy. Then we look at Shell. Most of their locations are extensions to existing fuel forecourts, which already have canopies. But do the Shell chargers at these forecourts have canopies? No. The only major one that does is the Shell forecourt at Fulham. This is a converted petrol station, so it had a canopy already prior to it being converted. And they pulled that down and built a different one. Now, there are 1 or 2 other ones with canopies across the network. I was passing the Shell garage in Borehamwood recently and noted that they had one. But generally, they don't. And then we look at Instavolt. They have several major hubs. Stroud Park and Winchester spring to mind. They took greenfield or brownfield sites and had pretty much full rein for what they could do there. In Winchester, they got planning permission for a huge solar array, on-site battery storage, a brand new coffee shop, as well as 44 chargers. But did they get a canopy? No. Now, Gridserve, we all know them as the company that took over from Ecotricity and did such a great job with the charging at the motorway service areas. Now, I can give them a pass for not putting canopies over the 1 or 2 units they inherited and upgraded from Ecotricity, but they've since embarked on a large slate of new installs at the MSAs, offered up to 12 units at a site, and none of them have canopies, despite the fact that they're all on locations with wet fuel dispensers nearby that have canopies. However, when they've gone for the electric forecourts, of which there are 4 open and at least 1 in progress, they put fantastic canopies on there. Osprey charging. Similar story to Instavolt. Some sites installed where canopies may not have been appropriate, but they've also opened their own site at Strawberry Fields in Devon and didn't put a canopy there for planning reasons. But some locations do have canopies as a matter of course. Most of the MFG sites have canopies, and again, this is probably due to the fact that their chargers are usually co-located at wet fuel sites that already have canopies. Although they do have several sites, particularly one on the M3 near Wimbledon, the A3 near Wimbledon, that has no canopies. But that's at a car wash, not a wet fuel station. Now, Fastned are the other charge point operators that tend to put canopies on most of their locations, but not all. The Angel of the North near Newcastle is a standalone set of chargers in a lay-by near the statue. No canopy, and according to ChargeSafe when they went to evaluate, no lighting after dark. But that is an exception rather than a rule, and they're not all like that. Now, I was at the BEV charging oasis at Manchester recently. It's a lovely little site which has replaced an old petrol station that used to be located there. And however, despite the fact that there was already a canopy there back in 2008 when the petrol station was closed, there is no big canopy on the finished charging hub. What they do have, however, are small individual canopies at each charger. These rise up behind the charger and extend out over the top to provide a nominal level of protection from the elements. Now, this policy of adding unit-specific canopies is something that a couple of other charge point operators have gone for in a couple of sites. I could think of Arnold Clark Charging as an example. So, of course, the question that comes out of all these situations is, why don't CPOs add canopies to their charging locations? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, just about every wet fuel station has a canopy to cover the pumps. Why not chargers, or at least charging hubs? So let's hear what a couple of the charge point operators have to say about this. Now, last season I spoke with Andreas Atkins from Ionity about their charger hubs. He told me,
across Europe we have tested a few. We don't have any in the UK. I guess it's, does the customer, are they really asking for this? You know, we never, I would never install a site that's isolated. We always work with site partners, so there is always the opportunity for the customer to go inside the building, the site partner that we're working with, whether it's the Starbucks drive-through or the hotel or at the retail park. And of course, you know, if there is this question mark, is it actually what the customer wants? There's always the trade-off between that and extra cost. Every site is a business, it's the P&L. Mm-hmm. And the lower that we can keep the costs, the more advantageous we can be on the end price for customers and per kilowatt that they pay.
Now, we also had Tom Hurst, country manager from Fastned, on the show back in season 7, episode 140.
Since day one, Fastned as a company has been building and designing and delivering and operating what I can only call, I simply call petrol stations, but for electric vehicles. So you'll recognize our solar canopy with the yellow wing trim. This is fully timber framed, for example, mm-hmm. and that canopy sits on top of ultra rapid chargers today. I mean, it started with 50 kilowatt chargers back in the day, but now we're talking essentially high power hubs with several ultra rapids from day one. And again, since the mission that we had then is still the mission that we have today, and it's just as relevant. It's all about getting you on the road again as quickly as possible. And that's the area that Fastned plays in, right? We exist to allow you to complete your journey, whether you're carrying out a long, irregular journey or a regular commute, whatever it might be. Get on the road again as quickly as possible and as comfortable as possible. And And so for us, part of the story then is it's sitting underneath the canopy, for example. Why should you, as an EV driver, feel any less comfortable than a driver of a petrol vehicle who literally, as a given, expects a canopy, for example?
What's apparent from the discussions and those comments you've just heard is that there are different views on canopies between charge point operators themselves and between charge point operators and customers. Andreas basically questioned whether we actually need canopies. You're not standing outside in the wet, he said, except, of course, as in the example I quoted at the top of the show, you are standing out in the wet. The fact there's a Starbucks on site when you're connected and charging doesn't remove the need for covers while you're doing that important bit. Now, this is especially important if you're a disabled driver who might need to extract a wheelchair from your vehicle, transfer into it, grab the cable, place it on your knee, pay for the charging, navigate around the charger in your wheelchair, carrying a potentially heavy and cumbersome cable, and connect it to the car in the limited time period before the charging session resets. There's also another aspect to this which feeds into the bigger charging narrative about cost. Simply put, would you rather have hubs with canopies on them, or would you rather have hubs where the price of the canopies is put towards reducing the cost of charging? I've heard a CPO say that to me at one point. On the face of it, it seems to be an appropriate trade-off. But in reality, none of the CPOs that have installed canopies have increased their prices at these sites, nor have they reduced their prices at locations with canopies. What do we think? Canopies at a set price, or no canopies and lower pricing? Would you go for that? Linked to that is the related question, which is, given a limited budget for putting in a hub, would you rather that budget went towards installing more chargers at a site, or installing fewer chargers but with a canopy over them? Now, that's an interesting trade-off. Planning for a charging hub or site is a complex process and needs input from many different people. If energy needs to be brought in from the grid, a substation will likely to be built, and this needs to be included. Cabling needs to be planned for, as well as the on-site facilities such as shops and additional parking. Now, all of these things are common across all charging hubs, more or less. But when you then start to include things such as totems and canopies, it throws the planning into a different level. For canopies, you have the additional issue of sight lines and foundations. I know when Osprey Charging put their site in at the Paisley Pear near Silverstone, they originally wanted a canopy but were unable to add one due to the nature of the ground on which they were wanting to put it. There were things under the ground that couldn't be disturbed when putting the canopy support foundations in, so they had to abandon the idea. I've also been told that as soon as you add a canopy into a plan, it immediately lengthens the planning process by an additional 9 months. For CPOs who need sites to be up and running ASAP to start repaying their capital investment, a 9-month delay can be an issue. It's often quicker and easier just to not add the canopy. But I wonder how much of this plays into sites where there are already existing canopies, but the chargers are installed out in the open. There's obviously the cost issue, but how much does planning come into this? Let's take a good example. I've already mentioned the BP Pulse site on the Cromwell Road. This was an existing wet fuel station that was decommissioned and converted to a charging hub. As a wet fuel station, it already had a canopy, but this canopy was removed and replaced with a different canopy design in a slightly different location. Now, my understanding from speaking with members of BP Pulse is that because the canopy was there, the planning permission was almost built in for the new canopy. They had to justify why it had been moved and the new design had to be approved, but it was less of an issue than adding a canopy at a site when none existed previously. I suspect this is the same thing that happened with a Shell recharge site at Fulham. Incidentally, those two sites also have the large totems in place indicating that these are charging stations, not petrol stations. And this was also because they existed in the old site and their placement couldn't be changed. At the Cromwell Road site, for example, the totem is placed at the exit of the site rather than the entrance, because moving it further forward to be near the entrance would have caused sightline issues, apparently. So, we know that sites with existing canopies can have new canopies added, or at least get those canopies replaced. So why in places such as Watford Gap, which has both a petrol station canopy and a drive-through Costa canopy, why do the Gridserve chargers there not have any covering? I contacted Gridserve for comment, but they weren't able to provide a response before we went to record this episode. Now, this is something of a Marmite question. Some people want canopies because they're used to them from petrol stations. Some people want canopies because they've been caught out with chargers that don't work and they spent too long out in the elements trying to get them to work. But some people think the money that we could spend on canopies could be better spent reducing tariffs or improving charger reliability so that we can all charge first time, every time, with no issue. So what's your thoughts? Canopies or not? Let me know. info@evmusings.com. It's time for a cool EV or renewable thing to share with your listeners. Now, for many people, a 30 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf will have been their first foray into electric vehicles. Fantastic cars, really reliable, and great for pootling around town. But the limited range of around 100 miles on a really good day meant that they weren't much use for anything else unless you wanted to spend more time at chargers than you do driving. But an enterprising young home mechanic decided to change all that, and he did it by swapping his Nissan Leaf 30 kilowatt hour battery out for a newer Nissan Leaf 62 kilowatt hour battery. And he did it all on the driveway of his house in about 3 hours. It's pretty impressive. He ended up doubling the range of his car, and he loves the result. Check out the YouTube video showing what he did and how he now appreciates slower moving vehicles on the road as it helps him get better efficiency from his battery. The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence. See what charge points are available right now with live availability and unrivaled UK charge point coverage at your fingertips. Pay at thousands of charge points within the app or with the ZapMap charging card. Join over 1 million EV drivers, download ZapMap and charge with confidence. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Andreas Atkins and Tom Hurst. Many thanks for the help. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. I'm on the socials, on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm on Instagram at evmusings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts. So why not follow me there? Thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. If you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So You've Gone Electric, just updated, and So You've Gone Renewable. They're 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on Amazon. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I know you're probably driving or walking or jogging, but if you can remember and you've enjoyed this episode, please drop a review in iTunes or leave a comment here on YouTube. It really helps me out. Thank you. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words, is it canopy or canopies? Hashtag if you know, nothing else. Thanks as always to my co-founder Simon. You know, his latest entrepreneurial initiative is a mobile canopy for people on the electric unicycles. Keeps them dry in wet weather and shelters them from sun in hot weather. I have to admit, I was sceptical. I mean, a canopy on a unicycle? Surely that's very close to being a completely different sort of vehicle, isn't it? I mean, does it work? Can I get to see one in person?
Across Europe, we have tested a few. We don't have any in the UK.
Thanks for listening. Bye.